Take a look at these two assets. One of these was drawn with a mouse, and one with a pen. Your first instinct might be to think that the more intricate asset was drawn with a pen, but you'd be wrong. This fairly intricate asset was drawn with a mouse. So can you draw game art with a mouse? Yes. Should you? Well, probably not, but maybe. So if you have any actual familiarity with drawing with a digital stylus, you could probably immediately tell that this was drawn with a mouse. Most digital pens have pressure sensitivity, so when you draw a line, your line will vary in thickness across the stroke, and will often taper quite a bit. But with a mouse, well, since there is no sensitivity, the line is just equally thick all the time. And if we look at our asset, we can see same thickness across each stroke. But now you might be asking how I could possibly get such smooth and clean lines with a mouse. Well, in this particular case I used shape recognition in Procreate, which turns my wavy bad lines into perfect curves. And we can see that if I skip using shape recognition, but still use a mouse, my lines get slightly less perfect. But once again, it looks kind of decent enough that you could make a game this way. And I will note that even though there are a couple of programs that don't have shape recognition, most software do have line smoothing. So here's me redoing the line art in Krita on the computer. It looks fine. In fact, at this point, given how nice the lines look, you might be wondering how this asset would look if I drew this with a pen. Well, you'd get this. And if we compare the two, this version that I drew with a pen is considerably more messy, but we can see that the lines taper and they look thinner at some parts and thicker at other parts. Now I will say that I could draw this asset in a more clean and organized way with a pen if I wanted to, but I couldn't draw an asset that looks like this with a mouse, because as I mentioned, a mouse doesn't have pressure sensitivity. Personally, I like my lines a bit messy and loose in this type of way, but for some of you, that might not matter. Maybe you do want your lines to look this nice and tidy. So if that's the case for you, why would you buy a pen? Well, I do think there are legitimate reasons why you should draw with a pen, but it actually has almost nothing to do with how good art you can achieve with it. I pretty much firmly believe that art is in the head, not the hand. The reason I could draw this with the mouse is not because I'm a wizard at using the mouse. It's because I redid it until it looked good enough. In fact, I'm probably worse at using a mouse than most people, seeing as how I'm left-handed, but use the mouse with my right hand. But as I said, since I know in my head that a line like this is bad, I just redo it until I randomly stumble onto something good. So why should you use a pen then? Well, I think there are physical reasons why a pen is better than a mouse. An artist doesn't just draw nice smooth lines because of practice. An important reason why artists get clean lines is that they know how to draw from a point of stability. This partly relates to drawing from the shoulder or the wrist, something that by its very nature is quite tricky with a mouse. But to be frank, there are plenty of artists that only know how to draw with the wrist, and they do just fine. But regardless of artist, you generally tend to always have a few particular angles where you are the most stable. If we take me as an example, I tend to be really good and stable if I draw lines from this bottom and then up to the left. I can draw this type of line over and over and I always get kind of nice smooth arc. But if I try and draw from the top left and then down, then my line becomes absolutely atrocious. So what do? Well, I rotate my canvas or rotate my entire body in order to draw every single arc from the bottom right to the bottom left. I draw almost every line from the point where I'm the most stable. Now I do have more than one type of stable stroke. I can draw bottom up, I can draw bottom and counterclockwise to create a circle. If I change my pen position, I can even create fairly decent horizontal lines. But my point is that I have quite a lot of ways that I know how to create a stable line, a smooth line. And I always make sure to approach every single line from one of those positions. Oh, and if you're watching this as a super beginner artist, don't copy how I do my lines thinking it will work out. I'm left-handed, so I'm stable from right to left and down to up, but if you're right-handed, then drawing from right to left will probably be incredibly difficult. This is also why left-handed people tend to feel terrible when they learn to write, because they're taught to write letters in a way that is natural to a right-handed person, but in a way that sometimes feels terrible for a left-handed person. But we're talking about why using a mouse is bad. The problem is that I think you mainly have one type of movement that is stable across the stroke, the horizontal pan. You can get a kind of decent arc as well. This type of stroke is fairly stable, but I also feel that it often becomes bigger than I want unless I lower my mouse sensitivity or zoom out. And as I mentioned before, as an artist I have quite a lot of stable line types. So while I do have to rotate my canvas from time to time, I just inherently have more options when drawing with a pen. I have options both in terms of angles I can approach my lines, but I can also do a lot of different types of shapes quite easily. And more options means I get the perfect stroke significantly easier and significantly faster. Now I might be arguing that since you're resting your wrist with the mouse, you ought to be quite stable with the mouse as well. But if you look at how you move the mouse when you rest your wrist, you tend to not really make your stroke from that pivot point. Quite often you move the mouse with just your fingers, which does give you precision, but it doesn't give you stability across the stroke. If you were to just do semi-horizontal strokes, you could actually kind of use your wrist as your pivot point, but that also leaves you kind of limited. So while you might be able to still find some decent ways to get stable lines, you generally probably have fewer options in terms of angles and shapes. While you probably could find a way of doing it kind of decently with time, I think you will just inherently always produce kind of less stable lines than you could with a pen. But okay, this seems all kind of meaningless. In an ideal world, a pen is a more stable tool, but if you don't have the money for a digital stylus, then you don't. And at that point, maybe you can live with just drawing with a mouse. And you're absolutely right. Just make sure it's an informed decision. Because on top of these stability issues, you're also limiting the type of art you could do. The pressure sensitivity is actually kind of valuable. It means you can shade, and it means that you can have different line weight. And there are ways to fake that result with a mouse, but it just doesn't come naturally. So you would probably have to develop a style that fits the tools you're using. Something similar to my doodly kind of style actually works surprisingly well with a mouse. But the type of art you might see in Rayman or Ghost Song feels kind of impossible to achieve with a mouse. Even Hollow Knight uses a surprising amount of stuff that would be difficult to achieve with a mouse. So on top of stability, learning to draw with a pen gives you the flexibility to develop your skills and your art style down the line. But as I said, depending on the type of art you want to do, a mouse might work just fine. If you do pixel art, since you place each pixel anyway, you aren't likely to mess up your lines in a way you can't fix. But when I draw pixel art, I kind of draw both with the mouse and the pen at the same time. Same case goes for vector art. If you use vector shapes, you don't need that precision in the same way, so you can get decent art even with the mouse. But in all of these cases, even though you can do it just as well with the mouse, you'll just be quicker with a pen. And when it comes to game art, and game dev in general, your time is valuable. And this is perhaps one of the more important reasons why you want to learn drawing with a pen. In order to draw nice lines, you also have to draw your lines quickly. I don't draw nice clean lines quickly because I'm particularly good. I draw my lines quickly because that is the only way to get nice lines. Slowing down opens up a lot of room for micro jitters because you have to stabilize yourself. But if you do it quickly, that stabilization isn't as noticeable, so you get cleaner lines. If you're drawing really slowly and carefully and you get terrible lines, that is probably the problem. In my opinion, it's generally better to redo the lines 20 times quickly than 1 time slowly. Now you can probably learn to do this with a mouse if you draw with a mouse a lot. You'll gain confidence and you'll get used to kind of getting smooth and nice lines eventually. So as I said in the beginning, it's not like drawing with a mouse is impossible. Drawing skills exist in the head, not the hand. The problem is just that drawing quickly often only comes naturally if you've done it a lot. I know that I probably should draw quickly and confidently with a mouse. It just feels really awkward. I can't get myself to do it. And if you plan to continue doing game art, eventually you'll probably want to get a pen, and that means you'll have to relearn a lot of things when you do finally get that pen. Learning to draw with a drawing tablet is actually quite tricky on its own, so if you both have to learn how to draw with a pen and how to draw with a tablet on top of it, you'll just probably not have a good time. So with that said, even though the best way to draw is probably with a pen, if you can't afford one, what I would try to do is make sure to do your sketches on paper first. Draw with a normal pencil or pen, take a photo or scan your sketch, and then trace your lines later with a mouse. That way you will develop some comfortability with a pen, making the eventual transition to a digital pen smoother. Thanks for watching. Bye.